Your support keeps these stories alive. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell. When I first met my wife, she was already carrying scars I couldn't see but would later learn to recognize in the smallest gestures: the way she tensed at sudden noises, the hesitation before speaking her mind when her family came up, and that fleeting but unmistakable sadness in her eyes whenever someone brought up childhood memories. At first, I chalked it up to life being life. We all have our baggage, but hers was carefully packed and carried so long it had become part of her posture. My wife grew up in a fractured family, her father from her mother's first marriage and then a younger half-sister from her mother's second marriage. That half-sister's father, from what I'd been told, was an emotionally and physically abusive man, the kind who didn't just leave bruises but rewired the way you thought about yourself. He was out of the picture before his daughter even hit middle school, 10 years in the family and gone. No one talked much about why. Maybe because in their world, pretending bad things didn't happen was easier than dealing with them. Her father, her real father, was the opposite. The kind of man who would give you the last slice of pie even if he'd been waiting all day for it. He wasn't perfect, but he was solid. And he got out of that toxic marriage early, not because he didn't love his daughter, but because he couldn't stand my wife's mother any longer. That woman, my future mother-in-law, could suck the air out of a room just by walking in. She had this way of making you feel like you'd already failed her before you'd even spoken. By the time my wife's half-sister, let's call her Sil, was born, my wife was already an afterthought in her mother's home. There's a 7-year age gap between them, but that wasn't the real gap. The real gap was emotional. Sil was the baby, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. My wife, she was just the extra mouth to feed until she could move out, and eventually she did. She went to live with her dad full-time when she was still a teenager, because in that house, she was nothing more than a financial asset, child support money. Her mother made an enormous scene over losing that money, but it wasn't about losing her daughter. That was just the excuse she used to make herself the victim. I first met my wife's mother a couple of months into dating. She looked me up and down in a way that wasn't so much curiosity as evaluation, like she was reading the ingredients on a store brand she didn't trust. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that tells you she's already decided you're not enough. Later, she made it clear my wife could do better. Her definition of better wasn't about kindness or loyalty, it was about money. I had a decent job, a stable income, my own house. I didn't live lavishly, but we didn't want for anything. Still, in her eyes, unless you were dripping with excess, you weren't worthy. Sil, even as a teenager, radiated entitlement. She'd never been told no, never been told you need to earn it. The way my wife described her growing up, you'd think she'd stepped right out of some bad reality TV show. The difference was she didn't have a rich father funding her, just a mother who would shield her from every consequence. The first time I met Sil, she was around 17. It wasn't what I'd call a warm introduction. She barely looked at me, and when she did, it was the kind of look you give someone who just cut in front of you in line. Later, when she turned 18, she started coming around more. At first, I thought maybe it was because she wanted to reconnect with her sister. My wife wanted that too, so she let her stay over on weekends sometimes. I didn't object. Family reconciliation can be a good thing. But it didn't take long to see something was off. She started gravitating toward me more than her sister. It was subtle at first: compliments, little touches on the arm, laughing at things that weren't really jokes. Then her clothes got skimpier, her comments bolder. She told me I had Ken doll arms, once pinched my bicep and laughed like it was harmless. I brushed it off, told my wife later, but didn't make it into a big deal. That was before the line got crossed. One night my wife was in the kitchen, Sil lounging on the couch next to me. She shifted closer, her knee brushing mine, and before I could process what was happening, her hand moved toward my lap. I grabbed her wrist mid-reach and told her to leave. She smirked and said, "You don't know what you're missing." My wife walked in just in time to hear that, and the explosion that followed could have leveled the house. Sil stormed out after telling my wife she didn't deserve me. You'd think that would have been the end of it. It was. Sil doubled down over the next year. Every visit to her mother's house became a minefield. She'd flirt openly, sometimes roping her cousin, who was just as poisonous, to tag team the harassment. The lowest point came during a Halloween party. They dressed up in matching skimpy animalier costumes and cornered me in a hallway, giggling like schoolgirls. They actually propositioned me, both of them, for a threesome. I told them to find someone their own age, and the moment my wife heard, she tore into them in front of half the party. But somehow we were painted as the troublemakers. Mill insisted I was lying, that I was making drama. I started realizing then that in this family, truth had no value if it didn't fit the narrative. And the narrative was simple: Sil could do no wrong. By the time we went low contact, I thought maybe we'd finally put distance between ourselves and the chaos. I was wrong. I hadn't even seen the worst of what they were capable of yet. That would come later, when money, legacy, and something far more valuable than either of those entered the picture. 2 years after we'd gone low contact with most of my wife's family, the call came that her grandmother had passed. It wasn't a shock, she'd been in declining health for a while, but the grief was still sharp for my wife. Her grandmother had been one of the few steady, loving presences in her early life. A quiet, graceful woman who seemed immune to the pettiness infecting the rest of the family tree. When the will reading was scheduled, we knew we'd have to face people we hadn't seen in months, people we deliberately kept at arm's length. My wife braced herself, but she insisted on going. This was about her grandmother, not them. The reading took place in a small attorney's office, the kind with thick carpets to muffle sound and shelves lined with law books that probably hadn't been opened in years. Mill and Sil were there, sitting together, eyes darting to us as we entered. Mill's smile was tight, but there was no warmth behind it, just calculation. Sil avoided my gaze entirely, which was unusual for her. Normally, she thrived on eye contact when she wanted to get under my skin. The lawyer went through the will item by item. The bulk of the estate went to my wife's uncle, her grandmother's son. My wife received a few specific bequests, but one in particular made everyone else in the room sit up: her grandmother's entire jewelry collection. This wasn't just a couple of rings and necklaces. This was the collection, pieces handed down from woman to woman in the family for nearly 2 centuries. Antique diamond brooches, hand-engraved gold lockets, strands of pearls the size of marbles. Some of it was worth small fortunes individually. As a whole, it was breathtaking. The moment the lawyer said my wife's name in connection with the jewelry, I felt Mill's eyes on us like a laser. Sil, for her part, looked stunned, then angry. The kind of anger that comes when entitlement meets reality. Her name wasn't mentioned in the will, not once. After the reading, Mill cornered my wife in the hallway. I stayed close enough to hear everything. "This isn't fair," she hissed. "That jewelry belongs to the family." My wife, calm but firm, reminded her that she was family and this was her grandmother's decision. Mill made vague threats about talking to a lawyer, but I knew even she understood that was a dead end. There was no ambiguity in the will. For a while, things were quiet. We had the collection appraised, mostly out of curiosity. The jeweler's face went pale when he realized what he was holding. The full appraisal came back in the hundreds of thousands. It was surreal knowing something so small and delicate could be worth more than our house. We decided immediately to keep everything in the original antique jewelry box, handmade mahogany with brass inlays, almost as valuable as its contents, and lock it away in our bedroom. We thought that was the end of it. It was. A couple of months later, Mill began reaching out again. At first it was harmless, holiday greetings, a casual suggestion we all get together. My wife hesitated, but she wanted to believe her mother was making an effort. Against my better judgment, I agreed to have them over for dinner. That night, I went out to pick up the food we'd pre-ordered. It was only supposed to take 20 minutes. My wife stayed behind to keep them company. Mill sat in the living room with her, chatting, probably laying on the fake charm, but Sil excused herself to use the bathroom. Driving home, I hit every green light. I pulled into the driveway sooner than expected, headlights sweeping across the front of the house. That's when I saw her. Sil was outside, my wife's grandmother's jewelry box in her hands, halfway to Mill's car. The moment my headlights hit her, she froze, then dropped the box. The sickening thunk on the pavement made my stomach twist. She bolted into the car, locking the doors like I was the threat. I jumped out of my car and let loose every curse I knew. The box lay cracked and splintered on the driveway. The brass hinge hung loose, one of the inlays chipped. My wife and Mill came running outside. My wife saw the box and went pale. Mill's expression shifted from shock to defiance in an instant. "You don't deserve this jewelry," she spat at my wife. I stepped between them. Mill's eyes narrowed and then, without warning, she hit me, not a slap. Clawed fingers raking across my cheek, sharp enough to draw blood. My wife's voice broke as she shouted she was calling the police. That finally made Mill retreat. She jumped into the driver's seat and peeled out of the driveway with Sil in tow. We left the box exactly where it had fallen, fingerprints and all, and called the cops. When they arrived, they took statements, photographed the scene, bagged the box as evidence. Mill and Sil were arrested that night. It should have been satisfying, but watching my wife sit on the couch, hands shaking, I just felt tired. In the end, they got nothing more than community service and a fine, slaps on the wrist for what they'd done. The jewelry box was returned, but it was damaged. We took it to a restoration specialist and the repairs cost hundreds of dollars. When I went to Mill to demand repayment, she laughed in my face until I reminded her that I had police reports, photographs, and a documented assault on my record. Suddenly, she was writing a check. I made it clear if it bounced or she stopped payment, I'd take her to court without hesitation. The check cleared. The box came back from the restorer looking better than before, but the trust was gone. We moved the entire jewelry collection to a safety deposit box at the bank. That night, I ordered a full set of security cameras for the house. I realized this wasn't just about keeping them out of our home, it was about never again giving them the opportunity to twist reality into something that could damage us. At the time, I thought we'd reached the peak of their madness. I hadn't realized yet that for people like Mill and Sil, there's no peak, just a slow, steady descent into whatever pit they're willing to drag you into, kicking and screaming if they have to. By the time the jewelry box incident faded into the rearview mirror, my wife and I had settled into a quieter life. We still had cameras on every entrance, the jewelry safely locked in a bank vault, and only the occasional text from Mill, usually some passive-aggressive jab masked as just checking in. Then my wife got pregnant. For the first time in a long while, the shadow of her family didn't matter. We were wrapped up in ultrasound appointments, nursery paint swatches, and long late-night talks about names. The name we chose wasn't random, it carried weight. It was my grandfather's name, a man who had shaped my life in ways I was still grateful for every day. The kind of man I hoped to be for my own child. We told no one, not my family, not hers. We wanted to keep it ours until the birth, or so we thought. At some point during her second trimester, my wife let the name slip to one person, her cousin, someone she still believed she could trust. A week later, we found out that Sil was pregnant. We congratulated her out of courtesy, though neither of us felt particularly warm about it. Then came the gut punch. Sil announced her baby name on social media. Our name, spelled exactly the same middle name style, the works. She posted a cutesy picture of tiny baby shoes with the name embroidered on them, and we knew she knew because my wife's cousin had liked and commented on it. At first, I thought maybe it was some bizarre coincidence, but my wife knew better. She called her cousin and asked flat out if she'd told Sil the name. The cousin hesitated too long before saying, well, she asked, and I thought it wasn't a big deal. It was a big deal. We didn't change our name, we weren't going to. But the moment Sil realized we were sticking with it, the campaign began. Mill started calling, then texting, then calling again from numbers we didn't recognize. Sometimes it was feigned concern, sweetheart, don't you think this will confuse the children? Sometimes it was outright threats. If you love your family, you'll change that name. She'd leave voicemails dripping with faux sympathy. It's just a name, honey, be the bigger person. When that didn't work, she got nasty. She told my wife she was being spiteful and selfish, that Sil's feelings should come first because she was more fragile right now. It was the same old golden child logic dressed up as maternal wisdom. It didn't stop with Mill. Sil's cousin, yes, the same one from the Halloween debacle, started harassing us online. She dropped comments on my posts, things like stealing names now, classy. I ignored them at first, but then she started posting vague story updates aimed at us. Eventually, I fired back. I reminded her publicly of that little incident where she and Sil had cornered me at that party and propositioned me. I didn't embellish, didn't get dramatic, just stated the facts. She blocked me within hours. Apparently, reality is kryptonite to people like that. But the rumors had already started. Sil began whispering to anyone who'd listen that I was into younger women and that my marriage wouldn't last past my wife's 40th birthday. She even claimed my wife had cheated, that our baby wasn't mine. That one stung, not because I believed it, but because it was so viciously calculated to hurt. My wife didn't hesitate. Without me even asking, she ordered a DNA test the moment our son was born. The results came back exactly as expected, 100% mine. She mailed a copy to Mill, Sil, and anyone else who'd been fed the lie. That particular rumor died fast after that. Still, the family was split. Some believed us, some didn't, and those who stayed in Sil's corner didn't just stay, they dug in. The final straw came after Sil and her baby daddy had a blowout fight that nearly ended their relationship. She ended up changing her child's name, supposedly to start fresh. Somehow, that was our fault. According to them, our refusal to change our baby's name had forced her into the change. Not long after, Sil's cousin showed up at our house unannounced. She stood in the driveway, arms crossed, and demanded we pay for the costs of the name change, legal fees, new birth certificate, the works. When we laughed her off, she screamed at us that we'd ruined Sil's life and that every time Sil said her child's new name, she'd think of us and what we did. Then she flipped me off with both hands, sneered, and this part is seared into my memory, said, "I wish I could do it with my toes too." I told her if she ever came back, I'd call the police and start paperwork for a restraining order. She left, muttering something about how karma coming. After that, we were done. Completely, irreversibly done. No more visits, no more calls. We blocked every number, cut ties with every mutual contact who couldn't respect the boundary. My wife's family, as she'd known it, no longer existed. Some people mourn the loss of family, but when the family has been nothing but a source of chaos, harassment, and betrayal, you don't mourn, you breathe. At least that's what I thought. But one thing I've learned with this crew: you can cut off contact, change your number, lock your doors, and still find them trying to crawl back into your life through whatever crack they can find. Cutting them off wasn't a one-time act. It was a constant, daily decision, a line we had to redraw every time they tried to step over it. For months after the baby name war, the silence felt almost unnatural. No calls, no texts, no fake just checking in messages. My wife even started to believe they finally gotten the message. I wasn't so optimistic. The first crack in the quiet came about 3 months after our son was born. We just gotten him down for a nap, one of those rare, deep, peaceful sleeps where you feel like you can actually exhale, when there was a knock at the door. Not a gentle tap, not the rhythmic knock of a neighbor. It was hard, impatient. I checked the camera feed before opening. Mills stood there, flanked by Sil and the cousin. They weren't smiling. I didn't even open the door all the way. "You need to leave," I said. Mill's voice was syrupy, the way someone talks to a pet they're trying to lure back inside. "We just came to see the baby." "You lost that right the moment you tried to steal from us," I told her. Sil jumped in louder. "We're family and he's my nephew." "No," I cut her off, "he's my son and you're not welcome here." The cousin chimed in with some sarcastic comment about how we were holding him hostage. That's when Mill dropped the real bomb. She said if we didn't let them see the baby, she'd make a call to Child Protective Services. Said she'd tell them we were unstable, that my wife had postpartum depression and I was controlling her. I stepped out just far enough that they could see I meant every word when I said, "If you even think about making that call, I will dig up every police report, every photo, every documented piece of evidence about the theft, the assault, the harassment, and I will personally hand it to a lawyer who will bury you in court. Try me." They didn't get the visit they came for. They left, muttering under their breath, and that was the last time they showed up in person. But they weren't done trying. 2 weeks later, we started getting strange friend requests on social media from accounts with no photos, no posts, just generic names. Then came the anonymous messages: "You'll regret what you did. Family is forever. You can't keep him from us." We knew exactly who it was. I started documenting everything: screenshots, timestamps, IP logs when I could get them. If they wanted to play games, I was going to play chess. The real turning point came on our son's first birthday. We planned a small backyard party, just a few close friends and my side of the family. The kind of day that's more for the parents than the baby, but still special. A couple of hours in, my wife's phone started lighting up texts from numbers she didn't recognize, all variations of "tell him happy birthday" from his real family. One even attached a photo of a gift bag sitting on someone's kitchen counter with the caption, "This was for him, guess he'll never get it." That night I told my wife we had to make it official. No more just blocking and ignoring, we needed legal protection. The next week I filed for a restraining order against Mill, Sil and the cousin. Given the history, the police reports, and the ongoing harassment, the judge granted it. The papers were served, and for the first time in years I felt the weight shift off my shoulders. The months that followed were quiet in a way that didn't feel temporary. No more knocks, no more mystery accounts, no more whispers through extended relatives. My wife was lighter, smiling more, laughing without looking over her shoulder. Sometimes I still catch myself wondering if they'll ever try again. People like that don't just change, they regroup. But now we're ready. We've built a life where their chaos can't reach us. And if they ever try, they'll find the door locked, the cameras rolling, and the evidence ready. Our son will grow up not knowing the twisted games they played. He'll know his parents love him, that his name came from a place of honor, and that we fought hard to protect him from the kind of family that would treat him like a pawn. Some people say blood is thicker than water. Maybe it is, but poison's thicker than both. And when you've spent years choking on it, you learn real fast the value of fresh air. For us, that air is finally clean, and I intend to keep it that way.